I've been babysitting for families around Millfield for almost 6 years now, and what happened at the Richardson house on March 15th still makes me check every room twice before I settle in anywhere. What I discovered that night changed how I view the homes I'm trusted to enter, and revealed a level of violation I never imagined possible in what should have been the safest of places. The Richardsons seemed like the perfect family when I first met them through a referral from my guidance counselor at Millfield High. Dr. Emily Richardson was a pediatrician at Riverside Medical Center, known throughout the community for her work with the Children's Cancer Ward. Her husband Marcus worked as an IT security consultant from their home office, specializing in corporate data protection systems for small businesses. The irony of that detail would become painfully clear later. Their 2 kids, 8-year-old Sophie and 5-year-old Tyler, were genuinely well-behaved and easy to watch. Sophie was advanced for her age, already reading chapter books and helping with her little brother when I wasn't looking. Tyler was energetic but sweet, the kind of kid who would bring you his favorite stuffed dinosaur when you looked sad. I'd been sitting for them every Friday night for about 4 months, and it had become my favorite regular job. The pay was good, the kids were angels, and the parents always came home exactly when they said they would. The Richardson house was a beautiful 2-story colonial on Maple Avenue, built in the 1980s but recently renovated with modern touches. Large windows that let in plenty of natural light, gleaming hardwood floors throughout, and an open floor plan that made the main level feel spacious and welcoming. The kind of house that appeared in home and garden magazines, with perfectly manicured landscaping and a 3-car garage that Marcus had converted into his home office and workshop space. That Friday started like any other. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. sharp, as always, carrying my overnight bag with homework and snacks for the evening. Dr. Richardson greeted me at the front door, looking elegant in a navy blue dress and pearl earrings for the medical conference dinner she and Marcus were attending at the Fairview Hotel downtown. She left her usual detailed instructions on the kitchen counter, emergency contact numbers, bedtime routines, dietary restrictions, and medication schedules all written out in her precise, doctor's handwriting. Marcus appeared from his home office, wearing a charcoal gray suit and looking slightly stressed about leaving his work computer unattended. "I just finished installing a new security system this week," he explained, walking me through the sleek control panel mounted near the front door. "The cameras cover the front entrance, the entire driveway, and the back patio area. Peterson Security Services monitors everything 24/7, and they'll call the house immediately if any motion sensors are triggered or if there's any suspicious activity." He showed me how the system worked, pointing out the small cameras positioned strategically around the property's exterior. "We've had some package thefts in the neighborhood lately," he said, adjusting his tie nervously. "The Hendersons 3 houses down had their car broken into last month, so we wanted to upgrade our security. The police actually recommended Peterson. They monitor about half the houses in this area of Millfield." After they left in their white 2020 Honda Pilot around 7 p.m., waving goodbye from the driveway, I got the kids their dinner. Dr. Richardson had prepared homemade mac and cheese earlier that day, along with apple slices and organic milk in their favorite cups. Sophie helped Tyler with his food while telling me about her school's science project on butterfly migration patterns. Tyler entertained us both with his detailed explanation of why his collection of toy dinosaurs were superior to real dinosaurs because they don't bite anyone and they fit perfectly in my pocket for adventures. We had our evening routine down to a comfortable science by this point. After dinner and cleanup, I helped Sophie with her math homework at the kitchen table while Tyler played with his extensive collection of Hot Wheels cars on the living room carpet, creating elaborate race tracks using couch cushions and books. The house felt warm and secure, filled with the comfortable sounds of family life. The dishwasher hummed quietly in the background, the antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed every quarter hour, and occasional cars passed by on Maple Avenue outside the large front windows. Around 8:30, I started the bedtime routine that had become second nature. Tyler needed help brushing his teeth and putting on his favorite Spider-Man pajamas, while Sophie was mostly independent but liked me to help her choose a book for her before bed reading time. I was sitting on Tyler's race car bed, reading him a story about a brave little mouse who went on adventures, when I first heard something that made my blood run cold. At first, I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make all sorts of sounds, especially on cool March evenings when the temperature drops and the wood contracts. But this sound was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone walking very slowly and carefully across the floor directly above us. Not the random creaking and popping of wooden pipes, but purposeful footsteps moving from one end of the second floor to the other. I paused in my reading, straining to listen more carefully. Tyler was getting drowsy, his head growing heavy against my shoulder, his breathing becoming deeper and more regular. The sound came again, definitely footsteps, moving from what seemed like the area above the living room toward the back of the house where the master bedroom was located. My throat tightened with anxiety, but I forced myself to stay calm and finish the story. The children couldn't see me panic. After tucking Tyler into his bed with his favorite stuffed brontosaurus, I walked across the hall to check on Sophie. She was already settled in her pink and purple bedroom, reading quietly under the soft glow of her fairy lights, her blonde hair spread across her pillow like a halo. "Everything okay tonight, Sophie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and normal. "Uh-huh," she replied without looking up from her chapter book. "Did you hear those walking sounds earlier? Sometimes when Daddy works really late in his office, we can hear him walking around upstairs in his bedroom, especially when he's on those long phone calls with his computer clients." My heart nearly stopped. Marcus wasn't home. He and Dr. Richardson were across town at the medical conference dinner, probably sitting in the hotel banquet room right now, completely unaware of what was happening in their house. "Sweetie, remember your parents went to that doctor dinner tonight? They won't be home until really late." Sophie looked up from her book, her blue eyes confused and slightly worried. "Oh, that's right. I forgot. Maybe it's just the house making those sounds? Daddy always says old houses like to talk to themselves, especially when it gets cold outside." I smiled and reassured her that it was probably nothing, but my hands were trembling as I turned off her main bedroom light, leaving only the comforting glow of her fairy lights. Standing alone in the upstairs hallway, I listened intently to every sound the house made. Everything was quiet now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. I'd been babysitting for the Richardsons regularly for 4 months, and I knew every creak, every settling sound, every normal noise this house typically made. Returning downstairs to the kitchen, I tried to focus on cleaning up from dinner, but my nerves were completely on edge. I loaded the dishwasher with shaking hands, wiped down the counters methodically, and put away Tyler's scattered toys, all while straining to hear any sounds from the second floor. The house remained eerily silent, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger with each passing minute. Around 9:45, as I was trying to settle onto the living room couch with my biology homework, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were much clearer and more distinct. Someone was definitely walking around on the second floor, moving slowly and deliberately from the master bedroom area toward the children's rooms, then stopping completely. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the footsteps themselves. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and tried calling Dr. Richardson first. The call went straight to voicemail after one ring. Marcus's phone did the same thing. They mentioned earlier that the medical conference had a strict no-phone policy during the dinner presentations to encourage professional networking, so this wasn't entirely unusual. But it left me completely alone and isolated with whatever was happening upstairs in the house. The footsteps resumed after a few minutes of silence, and now I could hear something else that made my skin crawl, a very faint creaking sound, like someone was slowly and carefully opening and closing doors, probably checking each room. My heart was pounding so violently that I was certain whoever was up there could hear it echoing through the house. I crept to the bottom of the staircase, clutching my phone like a lifeline, trying to decide whether to investigate or call 911 immediately. Every rational part of my brain screamed that I should call the police right now, but what if I was completely wrong? What if it really was just the house settling in unusual ways, and I was overreacting to normal sounds? The Richardsons trusted me to be responsible and level-headed in their absence. But as I stood there frozen with indecision, I heard something that made the choice for me, a soft but unmistakable thud, like someone had accidentally bumped into a piece of furniture while trying to move silently through the darkness. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find from the wooden butcher block, a heavy chef's knife that felt reassuringly solid in my shaking hands. Then I slowly climbed the stairs, my bare feet completely silent on the polished hardwood, pausing at each step to listen for any sounds from above. At the top of the staircase, I methodically checked each room with the thoroughness of a police search. Master bedroom, completely empty, the king-size bed still perfectly made from that morning. Sophie's room, she was sleeping peacefully under her fairy lights, her breathing deep and regular. Tyler's room, he was sound asleep, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, completely oblivious to my terror. The guest bathroom was empty as well, with towels hanging normally and the medicine cabinet securely closed. But as I stood in the upstairs hallway, trying to calm my racing heart, something continued to bother me about the house's layout. I'd been in this house dozens of times over the past 4 months, but tonight something felt fundamentally different. The hallway seemed shorter than it should be, and there was a section of wall near the linen closet that looked slightly newer than the rest of the hallway. The paint color matched the rest of the wall perfectly, but when I looked closely, the texture was slightly different, smoother somehow, as if it had been painted more recently. I ran my hands along the wall carefully, and found what felt like a hairline crack running vertically from the floor to the ceiling. When I pressed gently against this section, I felt the wall give slightly inward, as if there was hollow space behind it. My blood turned to ice water as I realized what I might have discovered. Pushing harder against the wall, a section about 3 feet wide moved inward about half an inch. It was a hidden door, so perfectly camouflaged and professionally installed that I'd walked past it hundreds of times without ever noticing anything unusual. Behind the false wall was a narrow room, about 3 feet wide and maybe 8 feet long. Using my phone's flashlight, I could see that someone had definitely been living in this space. A folding metal chair was positioned facing the wall that separated this hidden room from Sophie's bedroom. Several small holes had been carefully drilled through that wall at adult eye level, providing a clear, unobstructed view into Sophie's room and her bed. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone in horror. Someone had been watching Sophie sleep. Someone had been hiding in this house every single time I babysat, positioned just a few feet away from where I sat reading bedtime stories and helping with homework, observing everything we did. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone steady enough to dial 911. "There's someone in the house," I whispered urgently to the emergency dispatcher. "I found a hidden room, and someone has been watching the children sleep. Please send help immediately." The dispatcher, a calm, professional woman named Sandra, kept me on the line while I quickly but quietly checked on both children one more time. They were still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the horrifying violation that had been happening just beyond their bedroom walls for months. Following Sandra's instructions, I went downstairs and positioned myself by the front door with the kitchen knife, her steady voice providing the only comfort I had in those terrifying minutes. The first patrol car, a black 2019 Ford Explorer Police Interceptor with unit number 47, arrived within 6 minutes of my call. Officer Jennifer Martinez, a 5-year veteran of the Millfield Police Department, and her partner Officer David Kim approached the house with their hands resting on their service weapons, their expressions serious and alert. I met them at the front door, still clutching the kitchen knife, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. Officer Martinez took the knife gently but firmly, while Officer Kim immediately began asking questions about the house layout and what exactly I had discovered upstairs. "Where's this hidden room located?" Officer Martinez asked, her voice professional but reassuring. She instructed me to wait in the patrol car while she and Officer Kim conducted a thorough search of the house with their high-powered flashlights and portable radios crackling with constant dispatcher communications. From the relative safety of the patrol car, I watched their flashlight beams moving systematically through the upstairs windows, knowing they were discovering the same horrifying evidence I had found. 25 agonizing minutes passed before Officer Martinez returned to give me a preliminary report, and her expression was even more grim than before. "We found the concealed room you described," she said, sliding into the patrol car beside me. "Whoever was using that space isn't there currently, but they've been there very recently. We discovered a sleeping bag, several changes of clothes, non-perishable food supplies, bottled water, and personal hygiene items. This person has been living in your client's house for weeks, possibly months." Officer Kim joined us a few minutes later, carrying several labeled evidence bags that made my stomach turn. "We also found extensive surveillance equipment," he said grimly. "A high-quality digital camera with a telephoto lens, professional recording devices, and this notebook." He held up an evidence bag containing a thick spiral notebook. "Detailed written observations about the family's daily routines, including your specific babysitting schedule and habits." I felt like I was going to be sick. "What kind of observations?" "Precise times when you arrive and leave, detailed descriptions of activities you do with the children, your personal habits when you're alone in the house, even notes about what you wear and what you bring with you," Officer Martinez explained. "This person has been studying all of you very carefully and systematically." The reality of what had been happening hit me like a physical blow. Every Friday night for 4 months, while I believed I was safely caring for Sophie and Tyler in the security of their own home, someone had been watching us from just a few feet away. Someone had been documenting our bedtime routines, our games, our quiet moments together, treating us like subjects in some sick experiment. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home, or discovered that someone had access to your private spaces without your knowledge? What would you do if you found out someone had been secretly documenting your family's daily routines for months? What I'm about to tell you connects directly to what happened with the Richardson case, but from a perspective nobody saw coming. My name is Jessica Chin, and for 3 years, I was considered the most sought-after babysitter in Brookside. Parents would book me months in advance, pay premium rates, and recommend me to all their friends. What they didn't know was that I was living with a secret that made every job a nightmare. I was absolutely terrified of children. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, building a reputation as the perfect babysitter while fighting panic attacks every time I had to interact with the kids I was supposed to be caring for. But I needed the money desperately. My mom had been laid off from her job at Clearwater Manufacturing, and my dad's disability payments barely covered our rent on Pine Road. Babysitting paid better than any other job I could get as a 17-year-old, so I learned to fake it. My fear of children started when I was 12. My cousin Emma, who was only 6 at the time, had what everyone called behavioral issues. During a family reunion at my aunt's house in Riverside, Emma had cornered me in the basement playroom. For 2 hours, she alternated between sweet, innocent questions and disturbing statements that no 6-year-old should know. She talked about hurting animals, described violent scenarios in graphic detail, and seemed to enjoy watching my discomfort. When I tried to tell the adults, they dismissed it as Emma being creative, or going through a phase. But something in her eyes that day changed how I saw all children. That calculating look, the way she seemed to study my reactions, it made me realize that kids could be just as manipulative and dangerous as adults. Maybe more so because nobody expected it from them. By November 2023, I was babysitting for 12 different families in the Brookside area, working almost every weekend and several weeknights. My reputation was built on being reliable, professional, and surprisingly mature for my age. Parents loved that I followed instructions perfectly, never brought friends over, and always left detailed notes about how their children behaved. What they didn't realize was that my maturity came from carefully controlling every interaction to minimize my terror. I developed strategies, structured activities that kept kids occupied but predictable, early bedtimes to reduce contact time, and constant vigilance for any signs of the calculating behavior I'd seen in Emma. The Walsh family became my regular Friday night job in early November. Dr. Patricia Walsh was a psychiatrist who specialized in childhood behavioral disorders, working at Brookside Mental Health Center. Her husband Kevin was a pharmaceutical sales representative who traveled frequently for work. They had twin daughters, Lily and Rose, who had just turned 7. Their house on Cedar Lane was a modern two-story with an open floor plan and large windows that made me feel less trapped. Dr. Walsh paid exceptionally well, almost double my usual rate, and always left detailed behavioral notes that helped me prepare mentally for each evening. On November 17th, everything changed. Dr. Walsh had been called to the hospital for an emergency consultation, and Kevin was in Chicago for a sales conference. I arrived at 6 p.m. to find the twins unusually excited about something, whispering together and giggling in a way that immediately set off my internal alarms. "Jessica!" Lily called out as I hung up my coat. "We have a surprise for you tonight. Something really, really special." My heart rate spiked instantly. Surprises from children were my worst nightmare, unpredictable situations where I couldn't maintain control. "That's nice, girls," I managed, forcing my voice to stay calm. "But let's stick to our regular routine tonight. Your mom left instructions for dinner and homework time." Rose shook her head vigorously, her blonde curls bouncing. "No, no! This is different. We found something today that changes everything. Dr. Daddy says you're going to help us with a very important project." I froze. Dr. Daddy was what the twins called their mother when she was working. Dr. Walsh had never mentioned any special project, and she always communicated everything in detail. "What kind of project, Rose?" The twins exchanged a look that made my skin crawl, the same calculating expression I'd seen on Emma's face years ago. It was too knowing, too adult for 7-year-olds. "We know about the secret rooms," Lily said quietly. "We know about the man who was watching families. And we know that you know more than you told the police." My blood turned to ice. The Richardson case had been all over the local news for weeks, but the details about Foster's surveillance methods weren't public knowledge. How could these children know about secret rooms and watching? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, backing toward the front door. "I think there's been some confusion. Maybe I should call your mom." "She's not answering her phone," Rose said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's in a very important meeting about children who lie to adults. Children who pretend to be good but are actually hiding scary secrets." The way she emphasized lying and hiding secrets felt like a direct threat. These weren't normal 7-year-olds having an imagination game. They were targeting me specifically with information they shouldn't have. Lily pulled something from behind her back, a manila folder thick with papers. "We found Dr. Daddy's files about you. Did you know she's been studying you this whole time? Writing reports about your interesting behavioral patterns and concerning responses to child interaction?" My knees went weak. Dr. Walsh had been observing me professionally? The woman I'd been working for was a child psychiatrist who specialized in behavioral disorders, and she'd been treating me like a case study? "That's not possible," I whispered, but even as I said it, pieces started falling into place. The premium pay rate, the detailed behavioral notes, the way Dr. Walsh always asked specific questions about my interactions with the twins. Rose opened the folder and began reading in a sing-song voice. "Subject demonstrates classic avoidance behaviors when children display normal emotional expression. Maintains excessive physical distance during play activities. Shows signs of anxiety when children deviate from structured routines." The clinical language coming from a 7-year-old's mouth was horrifying. But what terrified me more was realizing that Dr. Walsh had been documenting my fear, studying my reactions, treating me like a research subject without my knowledge or consent. "There's more," Lily said, flipping through pages. "She wrote to other doctors about you. About the fascinating case of a teenager who functions effectively in childcare despite significant pediatric phobia. She thinks you might be dangerous." "Dangerous?" The word came out as a croak. "She thinks people who are scared of children might hurt them," Rose explained matter-of-factly. "To make the scary feelings go away. She's been watching you very carefully to see if you show any signs of wanting to hurt us." The room was spinning. Dr. Walsh hadn't hired me because I was a good babysitter. She'd hired me because I was an interesting psychological case study. She'd been using her own children as test subjects to observe my behavior. "But we know something she doesn't," Lily continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We know about Mr. Foster. We know he was watching the Richardson family. And we know you saw something that night that you didn't tell the police." I stared at them in horror. "How could you possibly know anything about that?" The twins smiled identical, unsettling smiles. "Because Mr. Foster had cameras in our house too," Rose said. "Hidden cameras that Dr. Daddy doesn't know about. And we found the recordings." My world tilted off its axis. Foster had been watching the Walsh family too? That meant these children had been under surveillance just like Sophie and Tyler Richardson. But unlike Sophie and Tyler, Lily and Rose knew about it. "We watched the videos," Lily said. "All of them. We saw you babysitting other families. We saw how scared you'd get when children act normal. We saw you hiding in bathrooms having panic attacks. We saw everything." The idea that these 7-year-olds had access to surveillance footage of me was beyond disturbing. They'd been studying my behavior just like their mother, but from a completely different angle. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "We want you to tell the truth," Rose said. "About what really happened at the Richardson house. About what you saw in that hidden room that you didn't tell the police." I told them everything, I insisted, but both girls shook their heads. "The recordings show you were in that hidden room for almost 10 minutes, Lily said. "But you only told police about finding it and calling 911. What did you see in those 10 minutes that scared you more than we do?" They were right, and the realization that they knew sent ice through my veins. There had been something else in Foster's hidden room that I hadn't reported. Something that connected to my fear of children in a way I couldn't explain to the police without revealing my secret. In that narrow space behind the false wall, I'd found more than just surveillance equipment and photographs. I'd discovered detailed psychological profiles of every babysitter who'd worked for the families Foster was watching. He hadn't just been observing the children, he'd been studying the caregivers. The files contained personality assessments, behavioral predictions, and most disturbing of all, recommendations for optimal caregiver selection based on psychological vulnerabilities. Foster had been identifying babysitters with specific fears or weaknesses that made them easier to manipulate or control. My file was the thickest. He documented my fear of children in excruciating detail, noting how it made me predictable and manageable. He'd even written recommendations for families who wanted babysitters who would be compliant and unlikely to investigate unusual circumstances. But I couldn't tell the police about the psychological files without revealing my own secret, that I was terrified of the children I was supposed to be protecting. It would have ended my babysitting career and exposed me as a fraud. "You found the psychological profiles," Rose said, watching my face carefully. "You found Foster's files about babysitters, and you saw your own file. How could you possibly know that?" I whispered. "Because we have copies," Lily said, pulling out another folder. "Foster sent them to Dr. Daddy as part of his research. He thought she might be interested in studying babysitters with psychological disorders." The room went completely silent except for the sound of my heart pounding. Dr. Walsh had been collaborating with Foster? The respected child psychiatrist had been working with the man who'd been stalking families? Dr. Daddy didn't know Foster was watching us, Rose explained. She thought he was just sharing research data about childcare psychology. She didn't know about the cameras or the hidden rooms. She thought the psychological profiles came from legitimate clinical studies. But when the police arrested Foster, Lily continued, Dr. Daddy realized where the data really came from. She figured out that she'd been studying information stolen from families without their consent. Now she's scared, Rose said. Scared that the police will find out she used Foster's data in her research. Scared that she'll lose her medical license. Scared that people will find out she's been studying you without your permission. I sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the web of deception surrounding me. Foster had been watching families and studying babysitters. Dr. Walsh had been using his stolen data to research childcare psychology. And I'd been covering up evidence to protect my secret career. What happens now? I asked weakly. The twins exchanged another look. Dr. Daddy wants to make a deal with you, Lily said. She won't tell anyone about your fear of children if you don't tell anyone about her research connection to Foster. But we don't think that's fair, Rose added. We think everyone should know the truth. About Foster's psychological files, about Dr. Daddy's research, and about babysitters who are scared of the children they're supposed to protect. Looking at these 7-year-old girls discussing psychological manipulation and criminal cover-ups with clinical detachment, I realized they were more frightening than any adult I'd ever encountered. They understood exactly how much power they held over both me and their mother. People trust babysitters with their most precious things, Lily said. They should know if their babysitter is afraid of children. Don't you think that's important information for parents to have? I stared at them, recognizing the same calculating intelligence I'd seen in my cousin Emma years ago. But these twins were different. They were working together, feeding off each other's manipulation skills, and they had access to information that made them incredibly dangerous. We'll give you 1 week to decide, Rose said. Either you tell the police about Foster's psychological files and Dr. Daddy's research, or we'll tell everyone about your secret. Your choice. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of deception and manipulation, I realized that my worst fears about children had been completely justified. They could be every bit as calculating and dangerous as adults, but with the added advantage that nobody expected it from them. The Walsh twins weren't just children. They were master manipulators who'd learned from their psychiatrist's mother and a criminal stalker. And now they were using those skills to control both me and the woman who'd raised them. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was studying you without your knowledge? Do you think parents have the right to know about their babysitter's psychological fears or limitations? 3 weeks after the Walsh twins threatened to expose everything, I thought the worst was behind me. Then I met Daniel Morrison through the Brookside Babysitting Network, and his story made me realize we'd only scratched the surface of how dangerous these seemingly perfect families could be. Daniel was 22, a college senior at Westfield University studying criminal justice. He'd been babysitting part-time for 3 years to pay for school, specializing in families who needed overnight care or extended weekend sitting. Parents loved him because he was mature, responsible, and planning a career in law enforcement. What they didn't know was that his criminal justice training would soon uncover secrets that put his life in danger. The Hendricks family hired Daniel in late November 2023, just days after Dr. Walsh quietly resigned from Brookside Mental Health Center. Marcus and Elena Hendricks lived in an upscale neighborhood on Sycamore Drive, in a sprawling ranch house with a circular driveway and manicured gardens. Marcus claimed to work in import-export logistics, while Elena described herself as a freelance consultant. Their son Jake was 9 years old, a quiet kid who spent most of his time reading or playing video games. Their daughter Amy was 6, energetic and talkative, always eager to show Daniel her latest drawings or dance moves. On the surface, they seemed like a normal, affluent family who needed reliable childcare during Marcus's frequent business trips. Daniel's first red flag came during his second week on the job. He was helping Jake with homework when the boy casually mentioned that his dad had taught him to count money in different languages. Not just English and Spanish, but also Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic, an unusual skill set for a 9-year-old whose father supposedly ran a shipping business. Daddy says knowing numbers in lots of languages makes you smarter, Jake explained, showing Daniel a notebook filled with currency conversion charts. He taught me how much American dollars are worth in other countries, and how to tell if foreign money is real or fake. Daniel's criminal justice coursework had covered money laundering and international financial crimes. Teaching a child to identify counterfeit foreign currency wasn't normal parental guidance. It was professional training. The second warning sign came when Elena returned from a consulting trip to Miami with a suitcase she wouldn't let the children touch. Daniel noticed her washing clothes in bleach at 2 a.m., the sharp chemical smell filling the house. When he mentioned it casually the next day, Elena's face went white. "I spilled cleaning chemicals on my work clothes," she said quickly. "Some consulting jobs involve visiting factories with harsh substances. I have to be very careful about contamination. But Daniel had studied forensic evidence in his criminology classes. Bleach at that concentration wasn't used for normal laundry. It was used to destroy DNA evidence and eliminate traces of illegal substances. The situation escalated on December 8th, when Marcus returned from what he described as a shipping conference in Houston. Daniel was putting Amy to bed when she mentioned that Daddy had brought back special candy from his trip, but it was the kind only grown-ups could touch. It's not really candy, Amy whispered conspiratorially. It's white powder in little bags. Mommy and Daddy counted very carefully and put it in different containers. They said if anyone asks, I should say Daddy sells protein powder for exercise people. Daniel's blood ran cold. A 9-year-old who could identify foreign currency, parents who handled mysterious white powder, and frequent travel to major drug trafficking hubs. The pattern was becoming clear. That weekend, while the family was at Amy's dance recital, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. Using his criminal justice training, he carefully documented what he'd observed. He photographed Jake's currency conversion charts, noted the dates and destinations of Marcus's trips, and recorded Amy's innocent comments about the special candy. What he discovered in Marcus's home office made his hands shake. Hidden behind family photos were detailed shipping manifests for cargo containers arriving at various ports. The manifests listed legitimate products like coffee beans and textiles, but Daniel recognized the coding system from his coursework on drug trafficking operations. More disturbing were the encrypted communication logs Marcus had printed and stored in a locked filing cabinet. Daniel's cybercrime class had taught him enough to recognize the structure of these messages, coded discussions of quantities, prices, and delivery schedules that had nothing to do with legitimate shipping. But the most terrifying discovery was a list of names and addresses, including several families in the Brookside area. Next to each name were notes about children's ages, school schedules, and babysitter information. The Richardson family was on the list, along with the Walshes and 3 other families Daniel recognized from the babysitting network. Daniel realized he wasn't just working for drug traffickers. He was part of an information-gathering operation. The Hendricks were using babysitters to collect intelligence about other families, possibly identifying potential targets for robbery, extortion, or worse. His hands were shaking as he photographed the evidence with his phone. This wasn't just about one criminal family. It was about a network that had infiltrated the entire Brookside babysitting community. On December 15th, Daniel made the mistake of asking Jake an innocent question about his father's work. Your dad travels a lot for his shipping business. Does he bring back souvenirs from different countries? Jake's response chilled him to the bone. Daddy doesn't really ship things, the boy said matter-of-factly. He helps people move special packages that can't go through normal mail. He says the packages are so valuable that regular shipping companies might steal them. What kind of special packages? Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Medicine, Jake replied. But not the kind from drugstores. The kind that makes people feel really happy but also very sick. Daddy says some people need this medicine so badly they'll pay lots and lots of money for it, even though doctors won't give it to them. A 9-year-old describing drug trafficking in innocent terms was beyond disturbing. These children were being raised in a criminal enterprise, taught to normalize illegal activity as just another family business. That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel was cleaning up the kitchen when he overheard Marcus and Elena talking in the living room. They didn't know he could hear them through the open archway. The Morrison kid is asking too many questions, Elena said quietly. Jake mentioned he was interested in your shipping business. That's not normal curiosity. I checked his background, Marcus replied. He's studying criminal justice at Westfield, specializing in financial crimes and drug enforcement. We should have caught that during the hiring process. Daniel's heart stopped. They knew about his major. They'd researched him just like he'd researched them. We need to make a decision about him, Elena continued. He's seen too much, and he's got the training to understand what he's looking at. The kids trust him too much. They're saying things they shouldn't. Give me another week, Marcus said. I'll figure out how much he actually knows. If he's a real threat, we'll handle it the same way we handled the Foster situation. The Foster situation. Daniel's blood turned to ice as he realized they were talking about James Foster, the man who'd been stalking families through hidden surveillance systems. Foster hadn't been working alone. He'd been gathering information for the Hendricks operation. Daniel carefully backed away from the archway, his mind racing. The Hendricks weren't just drug traffickers. They were part of the network that had been using Foster to spy on families. They'd been collecting information about household routines, security systems, and valuable possessions to plan their criminal activities. The next morning, Daniel called in sick and went straight to the Brookside Police Department. Detective Sarah Thompson, who'd handled the Foster case, listened to his evidence with increasing alarm. The addresses on that list match families that reported break-ins over the past 6 months, she said, studying Daniel's photographs. We couldn't find a connection between the victims, but if Foster was providing surveillance for a robbery ring, that explains the pattern. Detective Thompson's investigation revealed that the Hendricks were running a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Marcus wasn't importing legitimate goods. He was coordinating drug shipments through multiple ports, using his logistics background to move narcotics across state lines. Elena wasn't a consultant. She was a money laundering specialist who cleaned drug profits through fake business accounts. The most disturbing discovery was their use of the babysitting network. They'd been systematically hiring college students and teenagers to care for their children while gathering intelligence about other families. Babysitters had unknowingly provided information about house layouts, security systems, family schedules, and valuable possessions. They turned childcare into reconnaissance. Detective Thompson explained. Foster was just one piece of a larger operation. The Hendricks were using multiple information sources to plan their crimes. The children's innocent comments suddenly made horrifying sense. Jake's currency knowledge and Amy's stories about special candy weren't just exposure to criminal activity. They were evidence of systematic grooming to normalize illegal behavior. On December 22nd, federal agents arrested Marcus and Elena Hendricks on charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and using minors in criminal enterprise. The raid on their house uncovered 15 kilograms of cocaine, $200,000 in cash, and detailed files on over 30 families in the Brookside area. Jake and Amy were placed in protective custody with relatives in another state. Daniel testified before a federal grand jury about his observations and the evidence he'd gathered. His criminal justice training had helped expose a network that connected drug trafficking, surveillance operations, and systematic exploitation of childcare providers. The investigation revealed that at least 8 families in Brookside had been targeted by the Hendricks network. Foster's surveillance had provided detailed information about household routines, while babysitters had unknowingly gathered intelligence about security systems and family schedules. This case shows how criminals exploit our most basic trust, Detective Thompson said during the press conference. They used our willingness to welcome caregivers into our homes as a weapon against us. Marcus and Elena Hendricks were sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Their criminal network had operated across 6 states, generating millions in drug profits while systematically violating the privacy and safety of dozens of families. But what haunts Daniel most isn't the criminal activity. It's realizing how innocent Jake and Amy were throughout everything. They'd been raised to see drug trafficking as normal business, taught to help with money counting and package handling, completely unaware that their family was destroying other people's lives. Those kids thought their parents were just successful business people, Daniel told me months later. They had no idea they were living in the middle of a criminal enterprise. They were proud of their parents' work and wanted to help with the family business. The psychological impact on the children was devastating. Child psychologists working with Jake and Amy found that they'd been systematically conditioned to normalize criminal activity. Recovery would require years of therapy to help them understand that their parents' lifestyle wasn't normal or acceptable. Daniel completed his criminal justice degree and was recruited by the DA based on his undercover work with the Hendricks case. But the experience changed his perspective on family dynamics and the vulnerability of children in criminal households. We focus so much on protecting kids from strangers, he explained. But sometimes the greatest danger comes from the people who are supposed to love and protect them. Those children were being raised to become criminals, and they had no idea anything was wrong. The Hendricks case also revealed how criminals exploit legitimate services and relationships. They'd turn babysitting into espionage, use children as unwitting accomplices, and violated the trust that forms the foundation of community childcare. For me, Daniel's story completed the picture that had started with the Richardson surveillance and continued through the Walsh manipulation. We weren't dealing with isolated incidents. We were uncovering a network of people who systematically exploited the trust between families and caregivers. Have you ever wondered what your babysitter might be observing about your family routines and security? Do you think children can be held responsible for criminal activity they're taught by their parents? By early January 2024, the babysitting community in Brookside had been shattered by the revelations about Foster's surveillance network, Dr. Walsh's psychological studies, and the Hendricks criminal operation. Parents were questioning every caregiver they trusted, and babysitters were afraid to work for families they didn't know completely. That's when I learned about Margaret Sinclair, whose story would tie together everything we'd discovered and reveal the most disturbing truth of all. Margaret was different from the rest of us. At 28, she was a professional nanny with a degree in early childhood development from Fairview College. She'd been working in the Brookside area for 6 years, commanding premium rates and maintaining long-term positions with wealthy families. Parents considered her the gold standard, educated, experienced, and completely trustworthy with their most precious possessions. What made Margaret unique was her commitment to detailed documentation. She kept meticulous journals about every child in her care, recording developmental milestones, behavioral patterns, educational progress, and family dynamics. Parents loved receiving her monthly reports, which read like professional child psychology assessments. But Margaret's journals contained far more than developmental observations. She'd been documenting something much darker, and her records would ultimately expose the full scope of how the Foster network had infiltrated our community. I met Margaret on January 12 at a support group Detective Thompson had organized for babysitters affected by the recent cases. She was quiet during most of the session, taking notes in a leather-bound journal, while the rest of us shared our experiences. When she finally spoke, her words changed everything. "I've been documenting concerning behaviors in children for over 5 years," she said calmly. "What you've all described, the surveillance, the manipulation, the criminal activity, I've been seeing the effects in the children long before anyone discovered what their families were doing." Margaret opened her journal and began reading entries that made the room go silent. Subject: Child A, Richardson family, age 8. Exhibits hypervigilance behaviors consistent with chronic stress exposure. Frequently checks windows and doors. Asks repeated questions about strange sounds in the house. Shows advanced knowledge of surveillance concepts unusual for her age group. She looked up at our shocked faces. "That was written 8 months before you discovered the hidden room," she said to me directly. Sophie Richardson was showing signs of trauma from being watched, even though she didn't consciously know what was happening. Margaret flipped to another section. Subject: Child B, Walsh family, age 7. Demonstrates sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation techniques. Uses clinical terminology inappropriately for developmental stage. Shows signs of parentification, taking on adult responsibilities and emotional burdens beyond her capacity. You were documenting the Walsh twins before anyone knew about Dr. Walsh's research? Someone asked. I documented concerning behaviors in over 30 children during my 6 years in Brookside, Margaret replied. What I didn't understand until recently was that I was actually documenting the psychological effects of systematic family exploitation. Margaret explained that her journals had originally been intended as professional development tools. She wanted to become a child psychologist and thought detailed behavioral observations would help her understand normal versus concerning development patterns. But what I discovered was that an unusually high percentage of children in Brookside were showing signs of chronic stress, hypervigilance, and premature exposure to adult concepts. she said. Far more than you'd expect in an affluent suburban community. She'd been documenting the psychological fingerprints of the foster network's activities for years, not realizing what she was seeing. Children who were being surveilled showed specific behavioral patterns. Kids whose families were involved in criminal activity exhibited different stress markers. Children whose parents were conducting unauthorized psychological studies displayed signs of being treated as research subjects rather than family members. The most disturbing pattern, Margaret continued, was in families where children seemed to know more about their parents' activities than they should. Kids who understood concepts like surveillance, psychological manipulation, or criminal behavior in ways that suggested systematic exposure rather than normal childhood curiosity. Margaret's journals had inadvertently created a psychological profile of every family in the foster network before anyone knew the network existed. Her documentation showed how criminal activity and exploitation affected children's development, even when the kids weren't consciously aware of what was happening. But there was something else in Margaret's journals that made Detective Thompson request an immediate private meeting. Something that connected all our cases in a way none of us had anticipated. I need to show you the entries about the families who hired me to document their children specifically, Margaret said during that meeting. Parents who didn't just want general nanny services. They wanted detailed psychological assessments of their own kids. Detective Thompson studied Margaret's records with growing alarm. These families specifically requested psychological documentation of their children's behaviors? 5 families over the past 3 years. Margaret confirmed. They paid extra for detailed monthly reports about their children's emotional development, social interactions, and behavioral patterns. They said they wanted to be proactive about addressing any developmental concerns. But Margaret had noticed something odd about these requests. The families asking for psychological documentation weren't concerned parents. They were systematically testing their children's ability to keep secrets, handle stress, and maintain family loyalty under pressure. The Hendricks family hired me for 6 months specifically to assess whether Jake and Amy could be trusted with sensitive family information, Margaret revealed. They wanted to know if the children would inadvertently reveal details about their parents' activities to outsiders. The implications were horrifying. Criminal families were using professional nanny services to psychologically evaluate their own children, determining whether the kids could safely be exposed to illegal activities without becoming security risks. Dr. Walsh hired me to assess whether her daughters showed signs of what she called inherited psychological disorders. Margaret continued. She wanted documentation of any manipulative behaviors or concerning social interactions. She was basically having me evaluate whether her children had inherited her own psychological traits. Margaret's journals revealed that the foster network wasn't just exploiting families from the outside. They were systematically evaluating their own children's potential as future accomplices or security threats. The most disturbing case was the Morrison family, Margaret said, referring to a family I didn't recognize. They hired me to document their son's resistance to authority and tendency toward rule-breaking behavior. They wanted to know if he was developing the psychological profile necessary for what they called family business operations. Detective Thompson's face was grim. They were using professional child assessment to determine whether their kids were suitable for recruitment into criminal activity. Margaret nodded. And if the children showed signs of being too honest, too rule-following, or too likely to report concerning behavior to authorities, the families would adjust their activities accordingly. The scope of the psychological manipulation was staggering. These families weren't just committing crimes. They were systematically evaluating and conditioning their children to participate in or protect criminal enterprises. But Margaret's most shocking revelation came when she showed us entries about families who had specifically requested documentation of their children's interactions with babysitters and other caregivers. 3 families paid me extra to observe and record how their children behaved around different babysitters, she said. They wanted to know which caregivers their kids trusted most, which ones asked too many questions, and which ones their children might accidentally reveal family secrets to. My stomach dropped as I realized the implications. They were using their own children to evaluate potential security threats among their caregivers? Exactly, Margaret confirmed. Children naturally reveal more information to caregivers they trust and feel comfortable with. These families were systematically identifying which babysitters posed the greatest risk to their operations. Margaret's documentation showed that the foster network had been far more sophisticated than anyone realized. They weren't just conducting surveillance and criminal activities. They were using professional child psychology assessment to optimize their operations and minimize security risks. The children were being used as unwitting intelligence assets, Detective Thompson summarized. Their natural interactions with caregivers were being studied and weaponized against the very people trying to protect them. Margaret's journals contained detailed profiles of every babysitter who had worked for these families, compiled through systematic observation of child-caregiver interactions. The families knew exactly which babysitters their children trusted, which ones asked concerning questions, and which ones might pose security threats. This explains why Daniel Morrison was targeted by the Hendricks family, Detective Thompson realized. Their son Jake had revealed too much information to Daniel, and Margaret's documentation had identified Daniel as someone their children trusted enough to share family secrets with. The final piece of Margaret's revelation was the most personal and terrifying. She pulled out a separate journal, one she'd kept hidden from all her employers. "I started documenting my own observations about the families themselves," she said quietly. "Behaviors and conversations I witnessed that didn't seem appropriate to include in professional reports. Things that made me uncomfortable but that I couldn't quite identify as criminal activity." Margaret's personal journal contained evidence of criminal behavior, psychological abuse, and systematic exploitation that she'd witnessed across multiple families. She'd been documenting the foster network's activities for years, creating an inadvertent intelligence file that could expose the full scope of their operations. "I have detailed records of conversations about surveillance equipment, money laundering, drug trafficking, and psychological manipulation," she said. "I documented it all because I thought it might be relevant to the children's psychological development, but I was actually creating evidence of organized criminal activity." Margaret's journals became the key evidence that allowed federal investigators to understand the true scope of the foster network. Her documentation revealed connections between families, patterns of criminal behavior, and systematic exploitation of children and caregivers that had been operating for over 6 years. The investigation that followed Margaret's revelations led to arrests in 4 states and exposed a criminal network that had generated millions in illegal profits while systematically violating the privacy and safety of over 200 families. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Margaret's documentation was what it revealed about the children themselves. Her journals showed how systematic psychological manipulation and criminal exposure had affected an entire generation of kids in Brookside. These children were being raised to normalize criminal behavior, accept surveillance as normal family life, and view manipulation and exploitation as acceptable ways to interact with others. Margaret explained during her testimony. "The psychological damage goes far beyond what any of us initially understood." Margaret's work helped child psychologists understand the long-term effects of growing up in families involved in organized criminal activity. Her documentation became the foundation for treatment programs designed to help these children recover from systematic psychological manipulation. As I listened to Margaret's story, I realized that all of us, the children, the families, and the caregivers, had been part of an elaborate system of exploitation that none of us fully understood while we were living through it. The foster network hadn't just been committing crimes, they'd been conducting a systematic psychological experiment on an entire community, using our most basic trust relationships as weapons against us. Margaret's journals documented not just individual cases of abuse or criminal activity, but the systematic destruction of trust between families and caregivers that had taken place over 6 years in our community. Today, Margaret works with federal agencies training investigators to recognize the psychological patterns associated with organized criminal activity involving families and children. Her documentation techniques have become standard tools for identifying and prosecuting networks that exploit family relationships. But the question that haunts all of us who lived through this experience is how many other communities might be dealing with similar networks of exploitation, and how many children and caregivers might be trapped in systems they don't even recognize as criminal. Have you ever wondered whether the families you trust with your most personal information might be documenting and using that information in ways you never intended? Do you think professional caregivers have an obligation to report concerning family behaviors, even when it means violating the trust that makes their work possible? The documentation Margaret kept revealed that trust itself can become a weapon when it's systematically exploited by people who understand exactly how to manipulate our most basic human relationships. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.